Welcome back. This is the second pour we're going to be doing today. This is over the 3 window panes that I'm working on. I'm going to be doing 3 separate pours on this one. And if you missed the first pour, you can click on the link below and see what I've done with that. Here we go. We're doing the second pour here. I'm getting my resin poured, measured out. Measuring resin is another really important part. You need to be very sure about how much you're mixing. This particular resin is a 1-to-1 ratio. Make sure that when you're pouring, you are right on the line of the measurement that you want to be on. No more, no less, because that will affect how your resin sets up. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm doing 3 separate pours today, and why I'm doing that is I'm going to do each window pane separately. This time I'm doing just a very light coloring over the top of what is already there. This is going to be the base for doing the second wave. So this one, I want to be able to see through the resin. When I put it on the window pane, I want to see the colors underneath. I want to see a little bit of the foam that's there that has already been put in on the first pour. So keeping this fairly light, again, I'm letting the resin run down the side of my container to see how thick the coloring is. Getting it to the color that I feel comfortable with, and also mixing my white so that I have it ready for doing my foam. I'll be doing this exact mixing 3 times today, doing each window pane separately, and each time I'm doing this gives me 20 to 25 minutes to get this completed. So keeping an eye on the clock again. A little bit easier today because I'm doing them separately instead of doing all 3 window pane pours at the same time like we did yesterday. So now I've got my colors where I want them to be. So I'm coming back over to my window panes. The resin from yesterday's pour is set, and I've added in some turtles onto the first pane that I'm pouring on right now. Those are just a fun little thing that just adds to the ocean scene. I'm pouring the resin right over top. Those have just been attached with a little bit of glue just to keep them so they don't shift when I put the resin over top. And again, you can see this is just a lightly tinted resin. You can see through it, you can see the turtles, you can see underneath the color of the water that I had previously poured. This also shows the wave underneath there. So because I'm working with doing 3 separate pours, I've got a little bit more time today to spread my product around because I'm only doing 1 window pane at a time. So that's kind of nice for me to have that time to work with making sure I've got everything where I want it to be as far as covering all of the water portion. I'm not going down onto the beach portion this time. My coloring will only go to the edge of the water that was poured yesterday. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just pulling the product down, getting it down to the edge, making sure it's smooth and relatively consistent throughout the whole window pane. Getting it down to the edge, because that's where I'm going to be putting my second beach wave. Is going to be right along the edge where I'm pulling this product down to. And again, you can see this resin has gotten a little bit of color to it, but not too much. We really want to be able to see underneath and get the depth of the water, the depth from seeing the waves underneath, because when you're looking at an ocean, the waves are breaking and they're getting rolled and getting covered up, and a new wave comes over top, and that's sort of why there's going to be a second wave, is to get that illusion that this is another wave coming in, rolling in onto the beach. As I mentioned before, this is not meant to be a heavy wave. This is a light wave. This is a very calm, kind of serene beach that would be just light waves rolling in. And I think, to me, that's why there's turtles swimming there too, because turtles, to me, would enjoy being in a water that's a little bit calmer, and especially when they have a baby, because this, to me, there's the mom, the baby, and the dad. So they're out on a little family swim. So that's just my take on it. But then just going over everything with the heat gun, taking out the bubbles, getting the product to just be nice and smooth. When I'm using my heat gun, I've got it at the maximum temperature. My heat gun has got adjustable temperature setting, and it's got 2 settings for the how fast it's blowing, and typically I am using it on high. Occasionally I will use the lower setting if I'm wanting to blow something a little bit gentler, but with big pieces like this, I'm using the full force of my heat gun and the full temperature. These are critical pieces for making any resin piece. You need to have a heat gun and a torch to work to get your product to be as smooth as it can be, and to eliminate any of those bubbles that are there, and to help, especially with doing a wave. These pieces are really important for trying to get your foamy wave look. So having the right tools, really important. And I'm just going over and taking out anything that I see that maybe is a little piece of lint or something that I see sitting on the resin. We want those things all to be removed. We want this to be as smooth of a finish as we can. So you'll see me moving back and forth and looking at it, different angles, trying to see if I can see anything anywhere that maybe needs to be taken out. And that's what I'm doing with the long stick, is just taking out any little pieces. I'm just waiting now for my white to thicken just a little bit. I don't want it to be too thin when I'm doing the next pour for the beach second wave coming in. So waiting, mixing. Again, almost always you'll see if I'm not pouring, I'm mixing. You always want to have everything to be mixed extremely well. We don't want any little bits and pieces of anything of coloring sitting in your resin as the finished product. Just waiting for that, and you'll see I'm always lifting my stick up out of my container to see how the thickness is. Also, another thing that I'm doing by holding it in my hand is I can feel the temperature. The longer it sits, the more heat it's giving off as it starts to set up. So the product that I have in the container is getting warmer, and as it's getting warmer, that's also an indicator to me that, you know what, it's time to get this onto my window pane and move it, because I still have to blow it with my heat gun and I need to torch it. So moving forward with it, spreading the line along the edge right where my resin is sitting, so we don't have a gap. We want the wave to be right up tight against it. And you can decide how much white you want to put on when you're doing something like this. This is, again, a soft kind of wave that's coming in, so it's not going to have too much white on it. There's going to be a little bit more than the first wave, but not too much. So again, I'm going to put a little bit up further in the water. So we've got a top wave there too. We'll still have the ones underneath that you'll still be able to see through, but we're just adding a little bit more depth to the whole picture. And I don't want to cover up any of my turtles with a bunch of foam. We want to still be able to see them and see them clearly to know exactly what they are. And taking out more bubbles, just going over the top. And if you've got a spot that maybe along the edge where the resin maybe didn't get spread to, you can use your heat gun to push a little bit of the resin over that area. Just going across here now and just doing a light blow on this little wave that's going across. And you'll see there's a little bit of foam over the one large turtle, but it's not too much. You definitely can see the turtle underneath, and that's what we want. And going down to the beach, pushing that wave out. And this one I'm going to push out a little further than I did with the first one, just to make it cover a little bit more of the shallow water. See the white underneath the foam of the first wave. You can see it through ever so slightly, and that just adds to the texture of our overall piece. And the resin will still create the foamy portion for a little while after I've finished working with it. It's not uncommon for it to continue to make a little bit more of the bubble. Most of the bubble is done with the heat and the torch, but resin keeps moving until it sets. So that's kind of a fun thing about it, is you don't really know what the total finished picture is going to be until it's completely set. Going over the top of this, again, taking out the microscopic little bubbles in the resin, and also working to get the torch to help with making those foamy little pieces of white into the broken wave that you like to see. So just going over the top of it and moving very, very quickly. The torch has got different settings as well. I've always got mine set on the highest torch, the highest flame possible, and moving very quickly. And just taking another look at the whole thing. If there's anything I see that needs to come out, this is going to be, hopefully, this should be our final pour on the water. So we really want this to be looking nice, no flaws in it. So always looking, moving around different angles to get the light so I can see what it looks like and make sure that I'm happy with that. Okay, so I have mixed up the exact same amount of resin, colored it just very lightly again, so that it will be able to be seen. All the colors underneath will be able to be seen through it. So I'm pouring that onto the second piece here, This is again second wave. These are the steps that are very consistent when I'm doing things with the second wave. The first one always has all of the color in it. Then the second wave is just a very lightly colored resin, and that allows everything to be seen through it, but it does add a little bit of depth. It's not just a clear resin, because that wouldn't give you the depth that you would want to have. And I'll be adding in also the white portion, which will give us again more waves. So you'll see I'm always over on this side, I'm always pulling out and using Lysol disinfecting wipes. Those are a really valuable tool. They are the one and only thing that will remove liquid resin off of things. So I like to use it for wiping my gloves off in between when I'm doing several pours like this. It will remove the liquid resin from my glove. It will remove resin from my tools that I'm using for mixing. So those are very, very valuable to me, because for me, sometimes I can reuse my gloves, most times I don't, but I do reuse my tools, and I very often reuse my mixing containers. So using the Lysol wipes is the only thing that will remove the liquid resin. That of course needs to be done before the resin starts to set up as well. So again, here I am, I'm just moving the product down, getting it down to the edge of the blue so I can get my white product put on for the second wave. Just going around the edge to make sure I've got everything there covered, and that I'm happy with how it's looking. I want the resin to be fairly consistent as far as how I've spread it and how deep it is across the whole piece. The heat gun will help to smooth it out, and it will keep flowing and flow over the edges as it needs. These pieces have been leveled long before I started pouring any resin. The level comes out, and ensuring that it is level in all directions so that the resin will flow properly and won't cause anything to flow off to one side. Taking the heat gun here, taking out bubbles, just blowing it again and again. I'm on high setting for my heat and for what I can blow. Instead of my low setting, I'm using the high setting to blow out bubbles. Checking my white to see how it's doing, if it's getting a little bit thicker, if it's feeling like the container is getting warm. And that's why I like to hold it in my hand, is so that I can feel it, because it's not always just visual. Sometimes it's the feeling of the container and the temperature of the resin. Once I've finished pouring all of these, there will be a fair bit of heat coming off of them, and that's just because the resin is setting up and starting to cure. It creates a chemical reaction, and when working with resin, you see I'm wearing gloves, I'm wearing a respirator. You need to be using safety gear when you're working with resin. Resin is caustic once it's mixed. You may not always smell fumes with certain resins, but you always need to be taking precautions. So make sure you have your safety gear. I can't emphasize that enough. So mixing, waiting for it to thicken, and in the meantime just taking out any bubbles. Even though the resin is not very thick, the little bubbles still pop up to the top, and the heat gun just blows them away. So always wanting to have a nice finish at the end, because again, this is the final layer on my water, and I want it to be as perfect as it can be without any little flaws. We want it smooth, and we want to make sure that the resin is thick enough with the white before I put it down so that the wave behaves the way I want it to. If it's too thin, and I blow the heat gun on it, it's just going to blow the product away. So as I'm stirring, I'm looking at different angles. I'm just double checking if there's any little pieces of lint anywhere. And again, having a nice still environment, a consistent temperature in your room, all important things. I'm fortunate, I'm working in my garage. This is an area that is totally separate from my house as far as ventilation goes, so none of the fumes go into my home. And I would strongly suggest, if you're working with resin, you need to have it someplace where it is separate as well, not in your home. Okay, so I'm just about ready to do the second wave. One last final blow with the heat gun to get any little microscopic bubbles out. Okay. And starting with the white going across. I find using wooden little mixing sticks for me is the best for putting the white down. That way I can control how much is being put down at one time. I can always go back and add more, but if I'm trying to do a thinner line, this seems to work really well. Just being able to control it more. And again, I'm going to be putting a little bit more down on this second wave than I did for the first wave. I just want this one to be a little bit more foamy than the first one, but not too much. And all of these things are something that can be changed as you're doing it. You can decide how much you would want to do as far as a wave. If you were doing a very foamy wave, it would be a beach where big crashing waves come in, so you would want to use lots of white, and your line would be quite wide. This one is not that type of a beach, so I'm using a little bit less. And you can see on the first window pane there, the waves are blown up into the water a lot further than I did with the first wave. And that's just the way that I felt that I wanted this to look. And then putting in another wave up higher, again trying to be consistent across so that we have a nice picture between all three, that it's consistent with our waves. Taking out the bubbles, and again I'm going to just do a quick blow across the whole board and then come back and do my blowing on the waves, spreading them out a little bit. And you can see it's almost like a ripple effect when the heat gun is blowing on there. And that just is pushing the product out across the resin to spread it out and making it look more like a little wave. Coming back across for the second small one that I did. And a lot of that one is just breaking up, and that's consistent with wave action, that, you know, it's not always a big wave going right across. There's little ones in between, or broken waves here and there. So keeping it looking as natural as possible. And pushing out the beach wave, the second wave now. And by pushing it out, you still want to be able to see that first wave underneath. You don't want to necessarily see it all, but you want to see bits and pieces of it. It just gives you that nice depth. And pushing it out a little bit further, like I did with the first one. Okay, well, that is just about it for the second wave on this one. I'm going to come back and do the torch, and that's just going to help to break up the white there a little bit more and give us the little bit of bubbles that we're looking for. Oh, I got a little bit of resin on the bottom of my torch there, just from what has flown off of the first piece there and onto the table. Okay, I'm taking out more bubbles. Moving quickly, back and forth, covering the whole window pane, making sure I don't miss anywhere, getting out those little bubbles, creating the foam. And that's about it for the second one. I'm just about ready now to move on to doing the last piece. Again, really nice that I was able to do each of the pieces separately and with the second wave. Just makes it a lot nicer to have a little extra time to work with, making sure I'm happy with how everything looks on each individual piece. Another good thing with my particular setup here is I have very good lighting in my garage. Really need very good lighting, especially working with something as large as these pieces, to be able to see all of the flaws that may be in your resin, to remove those, to be able to see. It's also really important because you can really see the colors that you're mixing too. So again, this one I have done just another mixing, exact same as the other two previous ones, where I've just lightly tinted the resin with a little bit of blue, keeping it so that you can see through it. We want to be able to see the shark. We want to be able to see the waves. And we want to keep our tools clean. If we can clean as we're going, that's the best way to go. That's typically what I like to do. I'm not worrying about cleaning my large containers just because my time is a little bit tight, and it's more important for me to get working on the piece and working with my resin than to always be cleaning the containers, especially with these big pours. Smaller ones, I've got more time, but this one, the focus is get my resin on, get it spread, get it where it needs to be, and then if I have time afterwards, then I can worry about cleaning the rest of my containers. So I'm spreading the resin out. Again, I quite like the little shark I've got in there. He just adds to another dimension and just adds to the overall piece. It's a peaceful little beach, but it's also drawing in all kinds of critters from the deep. And spreading it out onto the edge. And you can see on the other pieces how, even though the resin isn't set, you can see through from the top layer to the bottom layer. And you can see the coloring really nicely through there. Again, moving the product around. Always prefer to use my hand if I can. Sometimes I do use tools for moving product around, but the majority of the time it's with my fingers that I'm using to move the product. And wanting to make sure you're not dripping on your other part of your piece with your resin. If you do, by accident, drop some resin, drip some, you need to clean it up right away using, I use Lysol wipes. I find them to be what work best for me, and they are, if you've got liquid resin, they can clean it up really very nicely, and they remove any of that resin. Once the resin starts to set up, then of course you can't remove it with anything. You have to wait until it's set up, and you may be able to pry it off, or you may just have to live with it. So always being careful where you're pouring and what you're doing with your tools, so that you don't have those kinds of accidents happening. And just going over the top again, looking for any little bits of lint, hair, any little things. If you happen to get a little bug fly in or something, you want to get those out. And you always are crossing your fingers afterwards that after it's all poured, that nothing lands into your resin, so that you've got that nice finish. Getting ready with the white, stirring, always stirring, making sure it's mixed. And with the white, I do use a gel. It's not a powder. I found that it gives me the best results for doing the wave. I've tried several other products and just did not give me the look I wanted. And it mixes in very nice. Working to keep all the bubbles out. And then trying also to keep it consistent with the beach wave, the second wave here, keep it consistent across all three pieces so that the wave looks like it's one big wave going across, so it's not bigger on one of the pieces than on the other pieces, so it's very consistent, like it looks like they belong together. Oh, another little piece of lint. And the shark, again, just like the turtles, I added on after I had the first layer was set. Then I just cut him out and put him on there with a little bit of glue so that he would not move once I poured the resin over top. And you'll see I've got a little blob of white there. That's fine. I'm going to be blowing that wave out anyways, so I'm not worried about that at all. You can have little spots where it's thicker than other spots, and your heat gun is just going to help you blow that out and just create your foamy wave. Just making sure you've got a nice line and that you're happy with how much you've got there, and that takes some experience to figure out how much you need to put down as to how your wave is going to look, and figuring out how your timing is. How long has your resin been mixed for? Is your container starting to heat up? If it's starting to get hot, you can have flash cures where the resin will almost instantly cure and it will become extremely hot. I've only had that happen once when I first started working with resin. Just basically was lack of experience. Now I'm very aware of that and know to watch my timing, to be organized, and just move forward. Once you start working with it, you don't stop. You just keep going and watch your clock and make sure you've done everything you need to do before the 25 minutes is up, because that's your stop line for this particular resin. Now some resins you can work a little bit longer, but this particular resin, for me, 25 minutes is the absolute maximum for working with it. And I wanted to do just a little bit of foam by the shark there, so I did do just a little tiny piece of white there, just kind of to make it look like the water is moving around him. And then coming back down to the beach and start working with blowing the wave up. And you can just see how the heat gun blows the product. It's actually blowing it in waves, blowing it up into the water, the deeper part, giving us that nice finished look. Because once I put the heat gun down, then the wave doesn't get blown any further. It doesn't move typically much further than where I've put it. The bubble portion, the foamy portion, that can continue to happen, but typically it won't continue moving up on the wave and into the water. So just trying to finish that up, making sure I'm happy with how far I've blown it. And then coming back with my torch. Again, always moving very quickly with it. Be careful where you aim your torch. You don't want to catch anything else on fire. You always have to be aware of safety with resin in all aspects. And of course, you know, when you're adding more heat to the resin, that's also creating more chemical reaction. So again, safety gear, really, really important. But all of these tools, for me, are really important to get the look that I'm looking for. It just takes practice and experimenting. And liking how the shark is looking, the little bit of a white coming kind of off of his tail. And finishing it up with the final blow with the torch. Really liking the colors on the water. I'm quite happy with that, going from the teal to the light blue to the dark. The mixture is good, there is no hard lines. It just looks like a water that you could just wade out into and go swimming. And just take a final look over the top of it and make sure I don't see anything floating on the top that needs to be removed. Thanks for joining me on this second wave. We're going to be moving on to the third pour next. If you missed the first pour, you can go back and click the link below and see what's happened there. If you'd like to learn more about me, you can check out my Facebook page and see some of my other creations at Rustic and Shine Resin Designs.